Welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Executive Editor for Dataversity. We'd like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Data Warehouse Strategies. This year's latest edition in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken, brought to you in partnership with Data Blueprint. Now let me give the floor to Megan Jacobs, the webinar organizer from Data Blueprint, to introduce our speakers and today's webinar. Hello and welcome, Megan.
Thanks. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Megan Jacobs, and I'm the webinar coordinator here at Data Blueprint. We are pleased that you found the time to join us for today's webinar on data warehouse strategies. As always, a big thank you goes out to Shannon and Dataversity for hosting us. We'll get started in just a few moments after I let you know about some housekeeping items and introduce your presenters. 1 hour for the presentation, followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. I'll try to answer as many questions as time allows, but feel free to submit questions as they come up throughout the session. And answer the two commonly most asked questions. Yes, you will receive an email with links to download today's materials and the webinar recording, so you can view afterwards. The materials will be sent out within the next 2 business days. You can on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We set up the hashtag DataEd on Twitter, so if you're logged on, feel free to use it in your tweets and submit your questions and comments that way. We'll keep an eye on the Twitter feed, and we'll include answers to those questions in our post-session email. Now, I'll introduce you to our presenters. Peter Aiken is an internationally recognized data management thought leader. Many of you already know him or have seen him at conferences worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions to the profession. He's also the founding director of Data Blueprint. He has written dozens of articles and 8 books, the most recent being Monetizing Data Management. More than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and consistently named as a top data management expert. Some of the most important and largest organizations in the world have sought out his and Data Blueprint's expertise. Peter spent 2-year immersions with groups as diverse as the U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Walmart. He appears at conferences and is constantly traveling. Now, I'll let you introduce our special guest for today.
Thanks, Megan. Today we have with me Stephen McLaughlin, who has been working with us at Data Blueprint for the past 4.5 years. Yeah. Came to us with a very significant background in applications development. In fact, this really has developed a lot from his perspective in this. But in addition to the work he's done here at Data Blueprint, which has been phenomenal, he's also had some other interesting tasks where he's been the head of marketing and PR for a big game playing process. And he's got a whole other career as a musician and other sorts of things in there as well. In fact, he's got his own podcast as well.
Right. I think calling my time as a musician a career is quite an overstatement, but
you have records than I did.
Interesting time.
It was. This thing that computers and music goes very, very well. I also point out that Stephen is one of the folks that was involved in the review process for the DM, and we talk about this almost every event as well, where we talk specifically about now we can formalize a little better what we're doing around data management. So effectively, Steve and I, of course, and hopefully everybody else believe that data is the most powerful yet underutilized, poorly managed organizational asset that we have out there. It is your sole, non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset. And perspective, when you think about it and use that language, people start to think about it as something other than storage, which is really the part.
Yeah, it's really about framing what it is and what data means. And I think that's a really great way to put it.
If we can change the dialogue around it and make people understand that this is not solely an IT function, that it's really a business asset.
That's right.
In fact, when you talk about assets, we see these things written down places. Data is the new oil, which is good. You know, it flows through things and does that. Of course, data is dirty, and so that's sort of a problem. I saw this on a board recently. Data is the new soil.
Okay, I like that one. That's good.
Okay, right now. Data is the new bacon. That's actually a tier with that on there now.
But the difference is I can't join the Data of the Month club like I have with bacon.
You have a Bacon of the Month club.
Absolutely. All right. I'll send you an invite.
All right. Well, we'll give it a shot. Yeah, I remember, Shannon, when we were out in Portland, there was a bacon chocolate dessert of some sort they were trying to serve us at one point. Anyway, collectively, our mission is to unlock the business value that is in your data, strengthening your data management capabilities, providing solutions that are absolutely relevant to your organization, and building lasting partnerships with businesses there, because, again, we can't do it strictly from an IT perspective. So let's get started with our data warehousing strategies here.
All right, so we believe there's going to be two types of listeners out there, and anyone feel free to reach out to us if you don't fall into one of these camps. But we think the first type, people are interested in how to approach the subject of warehousing data. They may be new to it or don't fully understand the process, so they may need to integrate disparate data. They may need a more holistic view of business operations. Management may have just discovered what data warehousing is and says, hey, can you build me one of these? Alternatively, we think many of you out there may already have complex and or messy data warehouse practices in place, having a little trouble getting your head around them or want to improve them and make them more useful than they are right now.
And you just sort of your perspective coming at this as well.
Yeah, I certainly fell in camp number one. I think that the first time I was ever exposed to data warehousing as a concept, I had no idea it was called that, and I was doing some healthcare software, and we were asked to build a data cube, which of course is the first time I'd ever heard that term, for demographic analytics. And so that was kind of my first exposure to it, and I've been hooked ever since.
And that theme of cube will continue out throughout the presentation here. So what we're going to talk about today is put warehousing in the context of data management, as we always do. We want you to be grounded in this. In addition to that, then we'll dive into look at the motivation for integration technologies, because that's really what's happening here, is that data warehousing is one of several ways that you can integrate disparate data within your organization. We'll talk about how and when it should be applied in there. We'll talk specifically about warehouse integration technologies. We'll look at three particular foci here of the warehousing, which really are the first basic strategic decisions you're going to have to make. If you make the wrong one there, it's a lot of work to undo it and go back in the other direction. So learning these things up front is a great place to do it. The other part of it is we've been doing this for so long now that we have a tremendous set of starting blocks that we can put together. And so we'll talk about how to use those. We'll finish up with some guiding principles and then get to the part that we really enjoy, which is your questions and answers around about the top of the hour on this. So let's get started. Again, many of you have heard me say this. Now, I try to say it not too quickly for those that are new, but at the same time not repeat too much for everybody else. Data is a lot like Maslow's hierarchy of needs that you may remember from high school. If your physiological needs are unmet, your food, clothing, and shelter needs are unmet, you're very unlikely to go home and factualize. And whether that's writing music, playing poetry, describing things, dancing, it doesn't matter. You're not going to have that self-relief time in there if you don't, if you're hungry, if you're uncomfortable and you're out stuck in the rain. Data is an awful lot like that. We look at these things, and I put these out here in the golden triangle of data management. These are the buzzwords. They change every decade. We do different things. But these are things that everybody wants because this is stuff that everybody's writing about in the management literature. That is, of course, just the tip of the iceberg. And there's an enormous, larger amount to data management. What it really comes down to is that the foundation for that golden triangle up at the top has to exist within a framework. And that framework is really your data management practices, the DMM, that we'll talk about briefly in just a second.
But yeah, I got to tell you, I love this metaphor. Every time I look at this, it really speaks to me. I think so many people out there don't understand this, and they want to jump right to, I want a tool to do big data. Well, okay. Do you need data governance? Have you ever done a data quality effort? I mean, it's beautiful. I love this metaphor so much.
The other thing that works about this, though, is that people understand that there's a coherency that has to occur to these practices. And the ones I've linked right there now have a fairly strong chain on them. But in this particular example, if I have a very weak link to my data platform architecture, one of the 5 foundational data management practices that you need to do, that the entire platform only be as strong as the weakest link. And so you could improve your data governance and quality efforts in this example all you wanted, but you would never get to the point of having a solid foundation. Now, what we're really talking about is that most people at the top of the pyramid are looking at technologies because they think buying a technology will solve the problem. And I'll say that you can't solve the problem without the technology, but that's only part of the picture.
Right, absolutely.
What we're talking about is building capabilities at the bottom end of the pyramid here, and that those capabilities are much more important to your organization than any specific technology on this.
They may not be new and flashy, but they're what gets the job done, really.
Yeah, kind of the basics, right? Okay, good. So we need to look at that question, can I do the things in the golden triangle without doing all that other stuff? Because that's how hard it takes too long.
Right.
Yes, you do those things without doing the foundational pieces, but it will take longer, cost more. deliver less, and present greater risk to the organization, that if instead you crawl, walk, and run your way to the top of the capabilities that you're trying to get to. So we talk about data management, we really put this type of diagram together and say that data management is everything that happens between data sources and data uses. And you can see here we've got specifically broken out data engineering, storage, data delivery, governance, and things like that in here. And even this diagram here is really woefully inadequate because it doesn't really show us what we really got out of this. It does not depict the use of data. This looks like very much of a factory piece. Now, the reason this out here is because I'm challenging you all as a community to help us come up with a better articulation. I know you guys are taking these slides, using them. That's what you're supposed to do. We'd love credit where you're able to give the credit, but the important thing is for us to make progress. If somebody can help us come up with a better use of how data is really showing into that reuse part, that would be really, really helpful. And the DMM a second ago, we're really thankful to the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon for putting this together, taking some research that has been done over the years by a number of different people, and putting up the data management maturity model. If you haven't heard about this, we did a great couple of months back on it. We'll certainly repeat that webinar in the coming year. The key here is that there are specific areas and things, and this is the first time this has been laid out in this fashion to give organizations a roadmap, because if you are managing your data coherently, if your data governance doesn't manage the data assets professionally, if the quality of the data is not fit for purpose, if the platform and architecture implementation are overly complex, overly expensive, or overly cumbersome, or still, if your data engineering implementation is subpar, there's no way that you can achieve good results with the warehousing technologies or anything else that you're trying to do in the data world, and by the way, in your business as well. There's a set of supporting processes at the bottom here, which just talks about organizational support for it. These are somewhat reflected in the DIMA body of knowledge, the DIMBOK that we talk about regularly. Here we have warehousing brought out as a particular piece here. We, of course, want you all to participate in this because we're trying to grow the number of CDMPs. And, in fact, if you're going to join us at Enterprise Data World coming up at the end of March in Washington here, we will be actually setting for exams, and people will be testing for them, and we'll be trying out all sorts of things there. So, again, the Dataversity website has additional details on that you can take a look at. This is a page from the DIMBOK that just shows overview of what we're going to talk about today here, data warehousing and business intelligence management. You'll see the inputs on the left-hand side of the diagram, the activities in the teal part in the middle, and the primary deliverables on the far right there as well. And then here in the context, and say that the data warehousing, the warehousing assumes that you have an overarching data strategy. For example, one of the things that I was just chuckling about a little bit is we get a lot more requests to develop a big data strategy right at the moment than we do, in fact, to do the strategy. And of course, our first question when we're doing a big data strategy is what's your data strategy? And if you're doing a data strategy, what's your business strategy? That's right. In there. They made a decision then to you're going to need some more data and increase the complexity of your data management practices around this whole area. And again, here is the DIMBOK wheel to put us in. So that's where data warehousing fits in data management, a absolutely necessary but insufficient part. Let's get into the real meat of this then. Most organizations have had their system evolve in a very untypical fashion of unplanned.
Yeah, come up as needed, right? You have these heroes that build them, and it starts to look like this. And then one says, well, we need to start integrating, and it starts to look like this.
The question we always ask is, how does one win the game of Twister? The answer is by not falling down, but that's a very low standard, isn't it?
That's pretty bad. Although that's easier said than done sometimes.
Absolutely. It depends on the amount of alcohol.
That's where I was going.
So when you get to this phase of, well, I want to integrate all this stuff. Well, that's a great thing to say. What it really means is that you're going to put an additional structure into your legacy environment, and you start accumulating the data in the central part of it. And this will become now known as organization-wide data, your enterprise data warehouse. By the way, we're talking at the enterprise. This also could apply to the work group.
That's right. Yeah.
And finally, what everybody, of course, would like to get to when they've re-architected is to have a very nice, neat picture, which hopefully you think this looks a lot neater than the picture that Stephen started showing you just a second ago. Of course, the other part of this that's really important is that many of you are working largely in a packages environment, and same thing here, your data architecture and your warehouse become the things that allow you to integrate this information across and in between the various application packages that you have. So let's get some definitions. Warehousing, a technology solution supporting business capabilities, analysis of information that's not previously integrated. Now, it poses that you're not going to do a one-off integration, but that you're going to see an ongoing need for it. So there is a capabilities component that goes in there. This definition for business intelligence goes back to the year before I was born, 1958. They're not new things that we need to have, but what we're doing is developing new technologies that allow us to do them. And when we get to the analytics component here, we find that a lot of interest is around it. Again, the writings of Tom Davenport and other people have made this a very popular area. But what we find is that we really do need to reframe the question. The question that most people ask is, what data warehouse should we build? And instead, what we'd really like people to ask,
how can data warehouse-based innovation address challenges? Yeah, that's very apt. I mean, again, it's people looking for what should we do, why should we do it, or they're looking for what we should do and why we should do it is really the question.
So an example in particular is a healthcare example, working with hemophilia data. And if we were looking at the traditional analytics, people would be asking questions like what and what is happening. Looking at structured data, coming up with profile pie charts, narratives, things like that. I got told the other day from one company that you better not show me a pie chart because our boss doesn't like pie charts.
Yeah, pie charts are out, man. They're done.
Okay, well, what about that?
Thing is past.
From there into predictive.
Right, and most of you are probably familiar with descriptive, but predictive, this is relatively new territory, right? We're asking what will happen and why will it happen from the data. We're getting that from structured and unstructured data. We can see things like risk profiles, pros, cons of decision making, so.
And finally, people would like to get to what should I do? And if we can get to that stage, we can provide a lot of good expert advice to people, given that particular piece is happening. So you can see the structure here the structures here are more unstructured than structured, perhaps, because we're doing things like parsing through notes on an electronic medical record or something along those lines in here. This is really focusing more on a strategic piece. And one thing that's been held out as an exemplar of how to put all this together is Target. Again, Target's been in the news lately for some other things. We're not going to address those, but the ability they had to really understand their customer needs is one that has not been really equaled in the literature that's out there. They have a tremendous amount of work that they've done around these areas to be able to pull things together. Even Stephen Colbert did a little piece on that particular piece. It's a hilarious segment, but again, a piece. So what we're looking at here is the ability to say, when a customer touches us through any number of different channels, to know what that customer is trying to do.
And another good example, I think, that probably a lot of you are familiar with, that and I were talking about right before we started here, is Netflix, right? If you're out there and you're watching movies and you're rating movies, not attacking what you've watched, right? So they can do some descriptive analytics on that. They can start to predict what movies you're going to like based on your taste and other people's taste. And if any of you haven't done this out there, sometimes I'll just randomly see, okay, Netflix says I'm going to like this, I'm going to see if I like it, and I'll be darned if they're not pretty accurate.
You said they get you.
Yeah, they get me. They get me more than my wife gets me on movie taste. So. It's recorded, isn't it? That is. We need to edit that.
Somebody's in the next room. All right. So what we're talking about here is giving organizations the ability to drill into their data, to set summary data and find out what is the detail that supports it. This gives you access to the entire cube of information in here and allows us to go up and down from transaction level to detail level very, very quickly and efficiently without having to request that IT write us another report all the way around. And we do have this emphasis on the cube, although it's kind of not really the right metaphor.
Yeah, we were talking about that too. The term cube is used a lot, and I realize probably 90% of you listening right now get that, but for anyone who hasn't thought through what cube means, we're really talking about in dimensions. With humans, right, we can deal in 2- and 3-dimensional, but when you start to think about 6 dimensions, or probably more like 200 dimensions in the data, it can start to get a little scary.
String theory.
A little existential crisis or something, but we're talking about being able to slice and dice your data from any amount of dimensions.
The more complex you make it, the more complex of an engineering feat it is required in order to do that. So it all goes back to the organizational requirements, and here's a specific example of that.
Yeah, so this is a great one. So just as a quick example here, we're going to say, I want to see a list of customers whose income is less than $100,000 or they're younger than 30 years old. And so you can look at the little Venn diagram there. We're seeing the left and the right. So now we're going to the next one and say we want to see a list of customers whose income is less than $100,000, or they're younger than 30 years old, and they live in New York. In that green shaded area, those are going to be our positive results there. And we've narrowed down from 30,000 to 6,000 customers. So then we want to say, I want to see a list of customers with the income of 100,000 or younger than 30 years old and live in New York, and they purchased something in the last 7 days. So now we're slicing in a couple different dimensions there. We're getting now down to 800 customers. And further, we're going to look at the list of suppliers who serve those customers. See how that's really a basic question to ask. You say, I want to know what suppliers are serving people in this market. But really, when you approach it from a data standpoint, that's quite a bit of integration, or can be. So it can be a little bit more of a complicated question if data is not engineered correctly.
And perhaps the most important concept, and you said that in the last clause, if the data wasn't engineered for it, what's the likelihood it will happen to be able to be engineered that way?
Yeah, exactly.
And the answer is usually practically nothing, because if you don't explicitly design the systems to work together, there will be some integration challenges around that. Here's another quick example. If you're in a banking environment, you know that if you're starting a new bank, you can do different levels of risk. So we may cube people by social status, geographic location, net value. And this goes back to your first experience. Somebody said, you go cube this healthcare data. You want, what the heck are you talking about? Right? Oh, this is cool stuff, right?
Yep, that's exactly that.
So you cube it, you look at it and say, well, let's balance the risk return on the loan with the risk of default. Certainly we could make loans to very wealthy people, but there are a limited number of very wealthy people. There's a lot more poor customers, but we have greater risk of default. So where's the optimal balance? Right. So again, we can pull together. This is really what gets us into this data science stuff that everybody's talking about here. And this is an old example from CarMax, but we like the example because of the way they articulated it. Again, looking for people who can do this, we're solving original wide-ranging, open-ended business problems. You gave a great example of that. You're discovering new insights, and you're expected to own an area of the business. Who doesn't own an area of the business when you go out and do something like that? So this is the sort of buzz around this. Again, McKinsey says this is the sexiest career out there. I think it's sexy because they're talking about 1.5 million jobs, and anybody that's got a paycheck is sexy in some environments in this particular case. So let's ask the question to you guys. Are you starting a data warehouse or any other forms of integration? Did you do it last year, this year, or are you going to do it next year? We do this as a trending piece, and then we'll put it on the blog post in a couple of days so that you guys can look at the example or the answers on this. But we're starting to see some trends here. We'll see if the trends continue.
Yeah, I'm interested to see this. Should we suggest the Jeopardy music?
By the way, did you know this is a scientifically programmed thing? So 42 seconds is the optimal amount of time to get people to respond before they, I don't know how Shannon comes up with those numbers, but it's the right number.
Yeah, I'm curious to know how that came up with.
And Megan, can we vote on this one?
Can you?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I guess technically, maybe.
Right.
Shannon.
Okay, we want it in our own poll.
Yeah, that might skew it a little bit. All right, it looks like these are in. Let me get this pull up for you guys and see what the results are. Yep.
Last year, 23%. This year, 10%. Next year, 11%. And none. Some of you are being very quiet and retiring. All right. Well, we'll work with.
All right. So of the people that answered, a lot of the ones last year.
Exactly. It's becoming a more popular set of technologies here. And the reason for that is that a lot of these are going down. They're similar to a Moore's Law type of a process. So let's look at the technologies. We could do an entire webinar around just this one slide to talk about. But the real key is that the warehouse by itself is never sufficient.
Right, exactly. And we were just talking about that. It's a major piece of the puzzle, but it's certainly not the whole puzzle. There's a whole slew of both tools and technologies you need to use, and of course, like we talked about earlier, business process and really a lot of buy-in at a lot of different levels of the business to make these successful. So it's not just a technology, not just a tool.
Hence our stress on the word strategy. We very much would say if you're going to build a single standalone data warehouse, it's going to be a different set requirements from a technological perspective if you're going to learn how to start doing warehousing.
That's right.
And again, those are kinds of questions that you really need to answer before you go talk to any of the vendors about this, because of course everybody wants to tell you stuff, right? All right, so let's get some very specific definitions. The two standard definitions that most everybody sees here are Inmon and Kimball.
Yeah, and just as a quick summary, Inmon is a subject-oriented, integrated, time-varying, non-volatile collection of summary and detailed historical data used to support the strategic decision-making process of the organization, while Kimball is a copy of transaction data specifically structured for query and analysis.
And adherent to one of those two positions. By the way, I can tell you with personal experience, me, Bill, or Ralph are entirely wedded to their original positions on this. But it's a good place to look at it for contrast. And the key is that you're focusing on some things such as the subjects, the transactions that you're doing. You're looking at things that have happened, so they are not volatile. You're not going to go back and undo them or edit them or make them change. And that the most important aspect of this is that whatever your data is in for transaction purposes, it needs to be rearranged to be more useful so that you can do the cool things that you want to do with it.
Right. And if you all are, I assume you all are familiar with those two main methodologies, but there are a slew of other emerging approaches to data warehousing as well, which I think are pretty interesting. And there's a couple of other webinars through Data Ed that you can find that discuss that a little more in depth.
So I'll put a plug in for Bill's book. Bill's latest book on unstructured warehousing concepts has come out on Amazon just in the last month on this, and it's a pretty good read. So the key again here is that when you look at, and again, we're just taking another healthcare environment. If we're looking to see if somebody is eligible on the left-hand side of the chart, but would be eligible for a special treatment if their progress was of a certain rate, so if they were recovering at a certain rate. You can see that those come from the extreme left of this chart and the extreme right of the chart, the progress chart data and the eligibility chart data. And guess what? Since they weren't designed to work together in the first place, the chances of them happening to work together slim to none.
That's right. It'd be an ad hoc, time-consuming process to figure that out.
So instead, the hospital says, let's build up a form that we can start to pull all of this information into so that we can get things like you see on the bottom half of the chart, real-time alerts, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little more complicated. Here's a simpler version of the same diagram. You've got some data sources on the left-hand side there, two operational systems that weren't able to be integrated before. By the way, the number's never two. If it was two, it would be
right. That would be so beautiful.
That's you're usually what we're going to see. You integrate this, and the warehouse itself consists of the warehouse. Consists of the metadata, the raw data that's in there, the summary data that's all combined there. So that you have users that can go in for analysis purposes, for reporting purposes, for mining purposes.
Right.
Like that. Now, a lot of people conceptualize this, and Claudia Imhoff's book on the corporate information factory is a good way to think about this from some perspectives. If you are productionizing, if you will, the process of putting your data out there, it means that you really need to take a systematic process. We're looking at data as an assembly line of we've got transactions that go through and eventually become part of the historical record that we're maintaining in our combination of data warehouses and data marks that are around this, so we can do exactly the same kinds of things. As you can imagine, building one of these requires a fair amount of time and effort to do. We'll make you aware of two other alternatives that are here to the general traditional warehousing. The first one is what we call enterprise information integration model, and this is a space, if you will, that is not very well populated. But what the thing to take away from this diagram is that the blue pieces that you see there are physical tables, but that the orange tables on this chart can be built essentially on the fly. So you can take Stephen's initial piece that he talked about, number of families, income, et cetera, and that gives you the orange piece. You can use that with another physical blue piece to give you yet another orange piece here, and finally you get to the result set on the far left-hand side of your diagram without having to build that big data. Now, these are good for certain uses. A warehouse is really good for when you're going to use this in a production-oriented environment. This is more useful in an exploratory or maybe a prototyping environment to take a look at these. Finally, the concept of linked data is also very important. We are seeing not enough use around linked data. There's a tremendous amount of data that has been already predefined, and I have some good friends, a company called 3 Round Stones, located up in Fredericksburg, that has some terrific stories well, where they were able to bring in warehouses that some people had spent $30 million working on a warehouse, and because of the type of data and because of the type of engineering that they were working with, they were able to bring that $30 warehouse that didn't work in for $300,000, which is a tremendous savings in that overall process. On the other hand, here's an awful example of it. Here's a healthcare data warehouse we looked at somewhere in the Midwest. They had 1.8 million members in this warehouse, and by golly, they had almost a provider for every member. That's great. My own personal doctor, you know. Right. When we looked a little further into it, though, we found that 800,000 of those 1.4 million providers had absolutely no key at all, which meant we couldn't get them. 29% didn't have the required 9-digit numbers that were there. In fact, only 2% had the full 9-digit number that was required on some of those fields. So what we had here was an amazingly large warehouse, very complex operation. Again, a $30 million price tag, and zero. Now, this is the boss gets upset because the boss looks at this and says, you know what, I could have taken a room full of MBAs and accomplished this analysis much, much faster. So for every good story there is out there in data warehousing, there is a equally scary horror story where it looks like a government warehouse that is just crazy bonkers.
Or you have top men on the job.
So processes of failures we've looked at it is that the project goes over budget, the schedule slips, we are able to implement certain functions and capabilities. I'm not going to read these to you. You can get the sense out of it. It's a large, complex project, and if you try to do too much too fast, you will simply fail earlier.
Right. And the point here certainly isn't to scare anyone off of doing data warehousing. It's more to reiterate our point that it's just a silver bullet that's going to solve problems. It really is. You've got to be willing to roll up your sleeves and do a little bit of dirty work to really make this happen correctly.
And realize crawl, walk, and run is the way to get there. So what we want to talk about is reframing the question in here. So most of the time people say, how am I going to build this data warehouse? And that is a one-legged stool.
Or even worse, what should go into this warehouse? What a terrible place to start from.
And the reason that's a bad place is because what you really need to understand is not what's in the warehouse, but what do the business needs. So what we'd like the question to be changed to is how can warehousing capabilities solve this particular business challenge, or better still, a class of business challenges?
That's right. A much different approach.
And then look at this. The things we see is that organizations aren't ready for a warehouse, that organizationally it requires a set of skills that they have. And again, we'd like to see a three-legged stool in all cases: people, process, and technology. They may be really good on the people and the process side, but they have a poor technology. They may be really, really good with technology. These software packages work. There's nothing wrong with them. They do terrific work on this. But if you don't have the right maturity of the organization to understand how to do it, it can be just an absolutely waste of money.
Yeah, that's right. It really is a three-pronged approach there.
So let's go on a little further and talk about the specifics of the approach. We're going to talk about Inmon, Kimball, and then we're going to introduce a new one called Data Vault.
Okay, talk a little bit about Data Vault. We're all fans here. So this is a semi-typical Inmon implementation, right? You can see your different data sources, and this looks a little bit like one of the slides we looked at previously, but a couple of operational systems and some flat files coming in, right? They're doing some ETL into a staging area, and then those are coming into one of your warehouses, or a big warehouse. And in that warehouse, you've got your summary data, your metadata, your raw data, just like we saw previously. And then this is a little de-simplified from before, where really we're now building purpose-built data marts off of that data warehouse that are getting data specific to different sectors of the business, or to answer particular questions, so either within the data domain or possibly even geographically. Here you can see that we've got purchasing and sales and inventory, right? And so you've got different uses for these different data marts.
And then also the capabilities on the right, the mining can be applied to the inventory or the sales data mart, because the mining tools are using now integrated data, and that's one thing you couldn't do before with all the disparate systems. The reason we call this the normal form is because Inmon depends on that normalization.
That's right, yeah. And where each attribute in the relationship is a fact about a key. It's a highly normalized structure, so that's why you'll never see this go away. It's going to be great for transactional data. It's got plenty of use cases, like I just said, transactional data and operational data stores. Right? You can see a couple examples there of how it's often used, and this is probably familiar to you guys.
So there's some pros and cons with it.
That's right. It's easily understood by business and end users typically. You can usually look at a ERD and understand what's going on. Reduce data redundancy, right? That's kind of the point of it, really. It's got forced referential integrity. In-depth attributes make for very flexible querying, one of the great things about it. It does have some cons. Joins can be very expensive, and it becomes very difficult to scale into huge volume of data.
The second model, then, is to look at Kimball. Again, these are the two older models. What he's trying to do is to say, let's postpone some of those decisions. Let's not go for a fully normalized database, but let's instead postpone that decision further down the road until we get to a point where we're closer to what the users actually want to have. So rather than a big data warehouse at the staging area, in this case, we just talk about grabbing the data and doing whatever we need to do to make sure it can talk to each other, but is not truly structured in that wonderful third normal form we were talking about a minute ago.
Right, so these data marts are again, purpose-built, but they're purpose-built a little more with an eye towards being able to communicate.
And you'll notice the bus communication between the marks on that third column there allows us to go back and forth and do this type of work. We could have also drawn the data mining line up to the purchasing. We just had to make it very niche in order to do it. The key here is that Kimball is assuming that you're going to be doing dimensional type things, which means we're working within a star schema.
Right, now I'm sure you guys have again heard that term thrown around. A star schema is comprised of central fact tables that contains quantitative data, and then any number of adjoining dimension tables. So again, we're talking about those dimensions we can slice on, so you can start to understand the term cube is kind of coming into play there. This is optimized for business reporting, and some use cases are online analytic processing, and a lot of your BI tools are going to be dependent on star schema.
Most of the people that non-technical people understand this as they look at this, they go, oh, I can see sales are up or down. Why? Oh, they're down in Virginia. Let's drill down further. Oh, the guy that was selling in Richmond, he's weak.
That's right.
That may have required phone calls before, whereas now somebody can actually go in on the data and answer that question on their own.
That's right. So again, we've got some pros and cons. Simple design, pretty straightforward. Fast queries, because they're sort of purpose-built queries, and we'll talk some cons. Most major DBMS are optimized for the star schema design, so most platforms that businesses already possess are great for this. A couple of the cons, questions kind of have to be built into the design. It's not got the same simple querying that the third normal form has. And data marts are often centralized on one fact table, so they're not, again, at a higher level, they're not quite as flexible typically.
Did a talk last week on MDM and warehousing integration, and one of the things that came out was that the business users kept coming up to this particular architect and saying, I don't know how to use the MDM. And again, this is the same kind of thing here. They kind of get this idea that there's something in here, and star schemas are great for doing this flexible reporting structure that you have in many cases, whereas the third normal form might be a little better approach. We'll come back into an overall pros and cons on these at the end. But this gives you some capabilities. Again, if you need fast reporting and everybody understands star schema, Kimball is a great way to do it. If you understand the other structure and it's not an enormous project, then Inmon's probably a better way to go for that one. But there's a third alternative as well.
That's right, the data vault here. These data vaults are interesting. They're sort of more around long-term historical storage, which we'll see in a second here. Here we can see sort of similar to what we've seen before. We've got different systems feeding into a staging area, and then these batch loads into an enterprise data warehouse with some real-time communication with an enterprise service bus. Then we've got from that data warehouse, that's when a lot of the transformation work happens, sort of after the fact, after everything's fed in, basically take it all in and then worry about the transformation. So then off of that, we're building these star schemas, we're building error marks, report collections. And usually there's a complex set of business rules around that. It's sort of the idea that you worry about it downstream and just kind of capture everything so that we have everything.
This is particularly useful in organizations that are fast-changing or going to mergers and acquisitions or different versions of regulatory environments. So in the enterprise data warehouse, the third normal form, you had to have all that complex business logic understood and integrated into the original model. What this does is allows us to preserve history at a particular point in time. Between 1980 and 1985, we were governed by these regulations, but now from the data from 86 to 88 was governed by a different set of regulations.
Yep, absolutely right.
Inclusive of data processing in there.
Right. So Data Vault was designed to facilitate long-term historical storage. Retains data lineage information, so you track the source and the date the data was created. And again, we're having all the data all the time. It really is kind of a hybrid approach of Inmon and Kimball. It's comprised of these hubs, a little bit like a star schema. These hubs contain a list of business keys that don't change very often, and links, which are associations between these hubs, and then sites, which are descriptive attributes associated with the hubs. And the nice thing is if your data model upstream changes, you can basically just slap a new satellite pointing to a hub, and you'll have it all. You'll have the old satellite, you'll have the new satellite, and that's where we get that flexibility we're talking about. So some use cases, data warehousing, complete auditability, just like Peter was just talking about. You got all the data all the time.
This last set is a set of skills that not as many people are familiar with.
Right.
People have tended to become either familiar with Inmon style or familiar with Kimball style. This is a third alternative, but the real point is your business is going to have some needs, and it's much more important for you to be familiar with all three of these to decide which of these, if any, is appropriate to take a look in there.
Right.
Again, just some of the Data Vault pros and cons.
Yeah, again, we've got pros. It's simple to generate, houses immense amounts of data with very nice performance, full data lineage captured. The complication is pushed to the back end. I mean, we're not saying it's easy. All that complication gets moved later when you're trying to integrate. It'd be difficult to set up for many data workers, just like Peter was saying here, right? There's not a lot of knowledge about Data Vault out there yet, and there's not really widespread support for ETL tools yet. I think that's not quite as true now. I think that was like 2 years ago. I think we're moving along pretty well.
So if we go over these three tool steps here, again, you can see scalability, flexibility, reengineering, auditability, business interpretation, presentation, performance support. These are all going to be different attributes that are going to make sense to your specific problem.
Right.
You're the experts. You're the ones that are going to have to go in and say, scalability is crucial for mine, so therefore, let's go and get a check on all three of those.
Yeah.
Auditability. Let's say auditability is key on it. All right, so auditability, if that's a paramount and far outweighs the other pieces, then clearly you're going to be pointing towards a Data Vault type of an architecture right here.
Yep.
Again, this is you guys to look at. And let's hear some more from you on this now. Do you all, for the most part, have a single enterprise data warehouse? Do you have a set of coordinated data marts? Do you have a combination of both? Or are you uncoordinated in the sense, as in there's no strategy for approaching this process? Or is there nothing?
I'll spare you the Jeopardy song.
About 20 seconds left, and we're getting a lot of answers in. It should be. I'll get those answers out to you guys.
All right, Alex?
That's you, Megan.
All right, they are all in. All right, let's see here.
I'm going to come to hall and slap you guys.
Yeah.
11% coordinated, 7% both, 16% uncoordinated, 20%. So there's still a fair amount out there that's still working with these things. All right, those are your first basic strategy decision on all of these things. The next part is, if you really are truly getting started on these, the nice news, as Stephen said, is we've done an awful lot of work around these areas. I'd say we collectively as a community. These are a couple of books that are out there. Len Silverstone has a set of 3 books, Data Model Resource Books, Volume 1, 2, and 3, that come with a disk in the back with early models already established. David Hay did some groundbreaking research in this area. Early on, coming up with the first idea patterns. I had put some pattern work in my XML book that I did with David Allen a couple of years back, and David Marker and Mike Jennings have done a wonderful job with their universal data model book in that area. Again, these will give you something to start off with. So here's a meta model. By the way, this is not going to be directly useful to you immediately, but what you're looking at here is it needed to tie every element of an existing system to something in a data warehouse. This is a model that has most of that stuff built in there. it's key to be not the entire solution, but if you start off with this, you only have to figure out the deltas. And the reason you want to start off with something like this is because everybody likes to be a critic and nobody likes to create. So most of the time what you're dealing with is the blank screen, and that terrifies people. It's kind of like, you know, back in college, you remember you got this 10-page paper I got to write in the next hour or I won't pass, you know, 101 physics or whatever it is. These things that are designed to get you, by the way, it's illegal to do, just if anybody in my class is listening, you're not supposed to do that sort of thing. For data modelers, absolutely, use these things as starting places. Another really good starting place is that we've been doing some work in the area of what we call the Common Warehouse Metamodel. This is a very early version of it. OMG has worked to evolve this further, and it's the idea that you're going to start pulling things into play, and that most of these components are going to be a part of what it is. So again, go back to where Stephen and I started here 45 minutes ago. If you're just looking at the warehouse, that's only any fraction of what we're showing in here in terms of the model. A third example here, again, from David Marco and Mike Jennings' book. This is a blow-up of one of their meta models that they have, but you can see it's a very detailed model. And your question is not, is that my model, but how much of this model can I buy this book that is clearly less than $100 to get started on? Right. Just wonderful, tremendous work that was done in these areas, and very, very useful work products that come out of these things. So if you are starting a data warehouse, do not start off with a blank screen. There's an awful lot of stuff out there that you can use. We've been into some customers where we had to go in and say, well, I have a warehouse over there, but I'm not sure what's in it. And we actually have to use our diagnostic tools to go in and pull this out. And this is where we can go back and talk a little bit about the various tool sets. So we mentioned earlier is profiling and things like this. There's an awful lot of tools that you can use to effectively and efficiently reverse engineer any of your existing data sources that are out there. And by the way, you might as well quality work while you're pulling the data out at the same time. So we did another on this last week. It was, again, focused around some different areas. But think about it for a minute. You've done a tremendous amount of work of building up your warehouse. You've built the model. You've actually got the software out there. And then you go, let's turn the spigot and let the data roll into it. Right? Now, if you have done your governance and your quality work at that point, junk out. Exactly. Garbage in, garbage out. Of course, what everybody's going to do is say, the data warehouse sucks. That's right. Well, I'm sorry, the data warehouse is actually really good. It just happens to be filled with data that is not fit for use. Right.
I mean, we always believe that any kind of migration or warehousing should always be predicated by data quality work. And while not the focus of today, we want to put that bug in your ear that we really think data quality is a major component of this.
When you're looking at it from a strategy perspective, again, the things that we want you to take a look at, let me just flip to the next slide so we can get to these guiding principles on this. First of all, you've got to have executive support and commitment for this, although you really don't. We've got a lot of places where we'll work the organization, we'll work with IT, and they'll tell us what they've got going, and we'll look at it and say, that's great, and then we'll wander into the business. Right. And find the guy or gal who's got a SQL Server instance underneath their desk. Like, you're not going to tell IT I've got one of these over here. They're off the record here. We don't know about this. But would you be willing to tell the requirements that you have for this system so that we can use those? Because after all, if it's an operational system that's working underneath somebody's desk, it's buying some very specific.
That's right. It's not there for no reason.
So what I tell people is that the obtain executive support and commitment piece is really important, because what's happening in data management at your organization is usually happening largely at the work group level. But putting the work group said, Stephen, you know how to do SQL Server. Remember that from high school? That's right. No problem at all. You've got your own little parallel shadow IT shop that's running in this organization. And what we want IT to understand is that those are good. That that's a business becoming interested enough to do things. Now, we do have to protect the assets of the business. They're
a good start. They're not a good solution. Exactly. It's great that there's interest and that people are buying into it. It's better that it's not managed and it's not organizational. It can lead to very siloed implementations.
And we've seen actually in some cases where it's led to some very, very bad outcomes for the business.
That's right. And particularly if it's not governed or security is not taken into account, it can really be very risky.
One of the hardest parts of any of the projects that we're on is often obtaining access to the SMEs.
Right.
We probably should have spelled that out, and I apologize for that. SME stands for subject matter experts. Now, again, this is probably not new to a lot of you, but we've had some organizations that said, you gave me that word SME. So we didn't give it to you, but I'm glad you have it. And we'll call these business people experts. They like that. And by the way, they are expert at what they do. So it's a great term for them. But they're busy people. And so if we can't get access to them, I've been in positions where I was in the government and I had to actually sue contractors to get them back on board because they're using taxpayer money to do things with a separate set of stories. I'll tell you that one over a beer sometime, Stephen, on this. But we really do need to have them because we have all the technical capabilities here, but IT is not expert at the business.
Right, yeah. These are only partially an IT problem to solve, and that can be very hard to get across. And right, I mean, business, particularly when someone needs a data warehouse built or another solution built, it's a bit busy for other reasons, and so it can be very difficult to get time with people. And that's one of our ongoing challenges whenever we're on one of these projects is we really need time with the people who know the data, not the people who are going to implement data warehouse in a lot of cases.
Then, of course, that you don't necessarily want to do is IT drive the priorities. IT will understand certain things and have very good insight into other things, but I see about 1 in 10 IT shops that are fully capable of being a fully cooperative business partner. And that most IT shops have an awful lot going on. They're fighting off viruses and all sorts of other things that are going around. And them to list the business priorities, they will have a very good idea of what they think the business is.
Right.
But when we go out and verify it with the business, nah. So we have 2 stages for our set of requirements around warehousing. We have a set of requirements that we get, and then we validate those requirements with the business. If we haven't gone through that validation step, the requirements are still considered to be in a developing state.
And you're probably noticing an ongoing theme here with these guiding principles, and most of them aren't a technical solution, and they're not even necessarily an IT solution. We really are talking about getting all-in support, particularly from the business.
Of course, there's a little bit about quality as well already, garbage in, garbage out. Again, can't tell you how many times we have gotten to a place and we build the house and then businesses, okay, we want to have it up by Friday, and IT says, well, the only way we can do that is by forklifting the data into there.
Right.
That means walking into your existing data sets, pulling them out whole cloth, and locking them into this new model. It's usually the worst thing that you can do. Again, what happens is the warehouse gets blamed, even though the warehouse is functioning perfectly well. It's just delivering up data that isn't fit for use.
That's right.
You also need to learn to build in a series of graduated steps. Big bang doesn't work for anybody. It's all going to be there by Christmas, right? Well, we're 20 days away from Christmas, and I'm not going to hold my breath, and Stephen's not going to hold his breath either.
Right. You've
got to find, and again, we don't let anybody in IT go any longer than 90 days without specific incremental deliverables on this. It's the same thing for these warehousing projects. Your strategy should be saying, what do you need to get a first basic set? If you create something that just gives some numbers and shows that the technology works, they're not going to provide business value. But if you can find ways of providing incrementally more business value each time, that's going to give a lot of value to the organizations.
That's right. Easy to keep going when you do iterative development like that.
Well, you think about it. The last 6 weeks came really well. You've had customers who have told you this. I can do the next 6 weeks, right? I have very good faith that you can continue to deliver this type of a process.
Builds trust in the process rather than sort of being this behind closed doors. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't.
I'll take the curtain down and everything will be fine, right? Exactly right. We're getting a lot of requests for self-service. I had one group I worked with that said, well, we've got hundreds of projects going on. How are we possibly going to have warehouses that are going to help all of these things? So we need to develop some aspects of either self-service or at least transparency so that other people can get to use of it. And if you've looked at some of the new sets of tools that we have, things like Tableau and QuickView and things like that, of course the deduction is, oh, wow, look at, they could in real time built me a wonderful dashboard, right? There's a lot of engineering work that goes behind the scenes to get to that stage. But if we can teach the users how to fish instead of handing them fish, they will do a whole lot better.
And in general, I find that people's sort of knowledge and understanding about how to use it is so more vast than it was 10 years ago. I'm talking non-IT people here, that this concept of self-service may have been scary 10 years ago, but like it's a wonderful thing. There's a lot of really great tools out there, but just like Peter said, they're not just a tool solution. You cannot just say, I'm going to go get Tableau, I'm going to install Tableau, and boom, done. That's not the whole view. It's not the whole solution.
Hey, the other thing is one size doesn't fit all. Again, you need the right tools, the right products for each of your segments. I'm working with my barn right at the moment, and I need a growing rod to be buried in the ground. A 1 pound is not going to work. Here's an 8 pound hammer, but maybe an 8 pound hammer, that's going to do. So, again, depending on the size of your problem, get the right tools. It's just size, it's complexity as well that goes into it. Again, think of what that end product is going to be in mind. Yes, you may want to eventually aspire to be as targets and be able to predict that your customers, when they're going to deliver their babies. Okay? It's a terrific aspiration to get to. If you know your customers that well, that's a wonderful thing. If you could have heard Stephen say, Netflix gets me, right? He appreciates it. They know how to match the movies that he is trying to get to. They didn't get there in a very one-step process. Right. They built some tools, they built some other things. In fact, if you remember correctly, Netflix went out on the open market and offered $1 million prize for anybody that can improve their matching algorithm. It took almost 3 years before somebody came up with an improvement. It was only an incremental improvement. It's not a revolutionary improvement. So the key is, just like Netflix, just like Target, think of what you'd like to do on the end run, and then architect your process so that you have a nice series of phases so that year one you can deliver some specific business value, year two you can deliver greater business value, and get to the end product.
Yeah, it's great to have a vision, but it's also important to take a step back and have your roadmap and think in sort of incremental chunks on how you can achieve that vision.
One of the things I'm so surprised at is the number of organizations that have separate data warehousing groups from the rest of their data management groups. I've even gone as far as seeing the data management groups split between logical and physical, and the warehousing group on the far side of it. My peer is that these groups have more in common than they have in separate. And so it's really important to at least collaborate across these groups in order to do this, because if we don't do that, what you end up with is the data warehousing group building things that the architecture group hadn't even conceived of yet, and yet the physical group had teared apart one of those last week, and we could have used the one we tore apart. I'm oversimplifying here, but believe we've seen it when we've been around as many years as we have. You've got to keep vision in mind. And one of the charts that we don't show on this one, but you can see on our strategy chart, I think it's the first one up next year on there, is a chart that shows where projects go wrong. And what we see most often is that it loses the vision.
Yeah.
And so, data warehouse, why? I don't remember. No, that's the wrong answer. I want a data warehouse because I really don't have good information about my customers in one place, and I want to get it there. But just a statistic for everybody, the average organization has its customer data in 15 different bases in the organization. So if you are better than 15, you're in above average child, and if you're more than 15, you're not. Not surprising in the least. Again, start with the end in mind and see if you can get to that place. Give them the overall piece and let them know it's a multi-year, maybe even a decade-long process to get there.
And that's a hard sell. So we certainly understand that. It's a hard sell, and that's exactly going back to this incremental delivery. It's easy to find value quickly.
Look at this overall, then the other part, the summarize first option, optimize last, not first. And you don't want to spend a lot of time optimizing the wrong solution on it. So let's just sort of wrap it up with a single lesson on this. What we see in most organizations is that their data management practices are a very large black box organization that cranks out stuff that goes into some ETL pieces and maybe gets into a warehouse, and the warehouse then spouts off some specific marks, and the marks then go and do different kinds of analyses, each one for different groups. Again, it's a great environment to realize, but here's the problem. Most organizations, when they decide that this isn't working perfectly the first time, and I've never seen a project work perfectly the first time, have you?
I hate to say it, but
exactly right. So there's going to be a rebuild at some point in there. Their learning and feedback loop only extends within this half of the environment. And you can see that working within this half is a lot more challenging than going all the way back to your data management practices, finding what it is that you're really trying to get at. What is the real meaning of the organization on here? So in the last hour, we've covered warehousing, the context of data management. We've tried to give you some ideas for motivating these integration technologies, giving you the specifics around warehousing integration of the Inmon Kimball. And in this, do we call it the Lindstedt model yet?
I was just thinking
I think we'd like it to.
That would be nice.
We'll think we catch this
Let's call the data vault the Lindstedt model. There you go.
Again, looking at those particular foci in there and then starting off with some existing models so that you're not starting off from scratch. There's tons of stuff that's out there. Look to those guiding principles and best practices to use, and then hopefully you've covered what you've got here on this particular chart. And with that, we will stop and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Peter and Stephen, for that awesome presentation. Now it's time for Q&A. It's time for you all to ask your questions. So just click on the Q&A window feature at the top of your screen, and you should be able to submit your questions through that Q&A window. And we've had some roll in, so we go ahead and get started. The first is, what's your experience or impression of Inmon's textual software system?
Okay, sorry. The question was on Inmon's textual software system? Okay, so Bill and I did an event just a couple weeks ago, and what I've seen, he has probably put more thought into this than anybody else on the planet. As I mentioned, his book has just done a terrific job of trying to say, if you're really trying to get at, and neither Bill or I like the term big data because it's an undefined, unquantifiable piece, but if you want to do more with your existing data, is a great place to take a look, because you're not going to be able to do it all with structured data. You're going to have to be out there pulling in things that are messy. I don't also like the term unstructured either. Truly, the definition of something unstructured is something that it can't be structured. So I like to use the word semi-structured or actually tabular and non-tabular data. But again, what I've seen Bill do around this area is just phenomenal. He's got a webinar and a series of things that he does that are terrific around that. I have not seen anybody else that's done nearly the work that he's done in that area.
I have not. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'll have to check that out.
Absolutely.
The next question is, can you comment on a fourth style of warehousing, the logical data warehouse?
When you say word? Fourth. Oh, the logical.
Yeah, we're talking a little about sort of you gave a quick description there, I think.
Oh, well, you mean virtual data warehouse. You're referring to again?
It doesn't really specify. It just says, let me go back and read it. On a warehousing, the local data warehouse.
I'm not sure what the question's referring to, but I did mention this virtual piece here, where instead of building the data warehousing tables out physically all the time, that you could simply along with certain types of technology and build essentially virtual tables on the fly. Now, some people have referred to that as logical. I don't think that's technically exactly correct, so I may not be even answering the question. Maybe the questioner can give us a more precise definition. Stephen's on Google right now.
Yeah, I'm just not familiar with the term. Long or something. We may want to come back to this one, but we'll take a quick look at it and see if it's something we're familiar with.
Yeah, let's go to the next question, Megan.
All right, so the next one is, have you ever heard of anyone allowing data analysts to build the EL loading process for an EDW project?
I think it just depends on the size of the organization. I mean, certainly in medium-sized organizations, people are expected to wear a lot of hats. I think ideally there's probably a separation there for a large organization. I think, but I don't see a major problem with it.
No, and as you said, the larger the organization, the more likely you are to be specialized. It's one of the things we advise young people to start out in a smaller organization unless they really know what they want to specialize into, because they'll get more exposure to it. You sort of have to be a jack of all trades. So we can just do a quick Google on logical data warehouse. Looks like Gartner's got a report on it. We're actually not as familiar with that, so it probably wouldn't be appropriate for us to comment on it.
That's right.
Call your Gartner rep and see what they say about it.
We'll take a look at it, though.
Yeah.
It looks interesting.
Is, let's see, the big design upfront versus agile and data warehousing thoughts.
Say it again.
It's BDU, so big design upfront versus agile and data warehousing. What are your thoughts?
Okay, you were breaking up a bit, but it sounds like you're asking sort of our thoughts between the difference between big upfront design, agile data warehouse design. Look, as you said earlier,
sorry, I have a cold.
Don't worry. I come from an application development background where I kind of very much drank the agile Kool-Aid pretty heavily.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So So I'm a little biased there maybe, but I think that anytime you're doing any big project for a business, I really think the Agile methodology just makes a lot of sense because you heard me talking that whole time about right? You get to deliver these results people can value in the short term, and they see you building towards a long-term goal, whereas this big upfront, right, they've never worked for me.
Trust me, it'll be there.
That's
right?
exactly right. They're never. You don't ever get the design right in the beginning, so you're feeding back anyways, and so the difference is it can really lead to some issues if you're not careful about that. So I find that you almost wind up being agile anyways, whether you want to be or not, just as a result of the reality of that sort of big upfront design. But different opinion?
No, very much the same. I wrote a foreword for Larissa Moss's book on Agile Data Warehousing, and so again, that's certainly a book I would recommend to you out at Amazon. Larissa Moss, she did a great job on that.
Okay, question is, in IT, how do we get the business to value data governance?
That's a big question.
So I like to show people the cost of not paying attention to data governance. And our favorite poster boy at this point is Target. Again, not to pick on them in any particular way, but paying attention to that issue lost their CEO, their CIO, and almost their board of directors. Their board of directors, in fact, came under fire from the shareholders for being negligent in that area. So governance is a huge piece, and the easiest way to show management how important it is to show them some of the oopsies that some other organizations have encountered, and perhaps how vulnerable your organization is to that type of a process.
Right, and I think you could also flip that on its head rather than showing sort of the potential risks, which is a good, you have to consider that. I think you should also show some of the potential values, and again, that can be done with maybe a small pilot project. In fact, that's something we embrace heartily here at Data Blueprint. We love to do these pilot projects that can show value without much major investment, so maybe 90 to 120-day effort, where at the end of it, we can show some measured amount of value that should help the business get buy-in. I'd like to take a quick second to go back to the logical data warehouse. I mean, looking at it now, it makes much more sense now. The idea is basically it's rather than having one central, literal, physical database, the concept that you're pulling data from multiple disparate systems. I don't know any best practices around that, so speaking to it in any depth probably doesn't make much sense to me. But it seems like it's very flexible. It seems like it buys you some flexibility and less overhead. You may come at the cost of performance based on the size of data sets, but I'm going totally off the cuff here, so I know that's not answering the question.
Barry Devlin's name comes up here, and we did a webinar with him a couple of months back on that. You might Google his latest book on that. I think it was Inmon Intelligence, I forget, but he may have some thoughts on that as well.
So I'll come back to that, but now I've got that itch I got to scratch. I got to learn about it.
Okay, the next question is, do you have a rule of thumb on calculated fields and whether to store them in tables or use views to dynamically calculate them on the fly?
That's a good question. I have done both. I'm trying to think of when a situation would warrant it. I think by the time you're getting to maybe the self-serve by level, so someone's using something like Tableau, then those calculated fields are more aligned ad hoc based on the size of your data, right? If you have a couple million records you're looking at, that could take a long time. On the other hand, there may be a solid business case for a calculated field to be stored in a data warehouse, or particularly maybe a cleansed field, or maybe you want to see gross versus net. So I guess I don't have a strong opinion, right? It's each for the case that it's for. So,
but to the point, there's a set of tools and techniques that you can use, simulation and modeling, to determine what the impact of that's going to be. I worked on one that was an employee satisfaction warehouse, and the company was getting ready to go public, and the managers were very concerned about their self-perception. They would literally have a meeting and then went back to look at the data warehouse to see how they had done in that last meeting, to see if ratings were up or down. Wow. It was sort of a nutsy situation. Yeah. But it was interesting, and one of the things we did was to look and say, all right, well, let's just assume that each one of those recalculations costs X. whatever X was. And if it's happening 4 billion times a day, maybe there's some value in storing it instead of recalculating all the time.
Yeah, if it's slowly changing data, it makes sense to calculate at once. If it's rapidly changing data, then it might make more sense to get, in a tool or downstream. So this is one I'm afraid I have to kind of give a vague answer. It depends, right?
I have to watch our
I know. I'm trying not to say it depends all the time.
All right. In the business, how do we get others to value data entry processes?
I love to tell a story about this one.
Come on.
Working with a hospital in the Midwest, and the director of the hospital comes down, calls a meeting of all the physicians, and says, you guys have done a wonderful job, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to become the knee surgery capital of the Midwest. I have ordered some new surgery equipment. We're going to get you guys additional training around this. We had a donor that's going to give us a new wing on the hospital. It will become the XX knee surgery wing. It's wonderful, wonderful work, you guys. This is just really terrific. And I left the room, and the physicians kind of sat around and scratched their heads. And, Stephen, are you doing a lot of knee surgery? And he said, well, I'm doing some, but not a whole lot. How about the rest of you guys? What was going on here? So we traced it back a little bit. Guess what the default hospital admission code was?
Yeah.
Knee surgery.
Yep.
So the hospital admission people had been told get people admitted quickly. So they would pass past a couple of screens on the entry chart and take knee surgery as the default. And the hospital administrator was working with data and thought that they were doing tremendous amount more knee surgery than they were actually doing.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, hopefully that's not your hospital. But, find something along those lines, or tell that story again. I mean,
I think maybe even a basic profiling of the data and show that to the users could be good. I mean, you could say, do you think this field is necessary, right? And what are the values this field should be? And then you show them, well, I did this profiling, and it turns out that it's 80% null. And people think this field is supposed to be used. So maybe show them the results of poor data entry. That might be one good way to get some in there.
A glass half full, glass half empty. So I tend to find that management is motivated a lot by fear and risk these days, and so it's not bad to necessarily show them those things play into areas that they should be paying attention to. On the other hand, Stephen's right. It is better to give a positive example of this and say, look, if we capture the data well here, look how much more time it would save in the long run.
Peter, I just think that the more you tighten your grip, the more star systems slip between your fingers.
That's it, inside, guys.
Next question is, what is the proper use of SOA data integration versus data warehouse data integration?
Two types of integration. It's a good question and very appropriate for what we're talking about today. So SOA integration is the idea that you're going to build a series of organization-wide services that are going to be able to access data. Right. People tend to think of this as sort of a plug and play. If I tap into this data source, I will always get an authoritative source of personnel data, for example, if that's the stuff they're piping around. You could do that in two ways. You could have that, three ways. You could do it by taking it all into the and having it come out of there. So your services can come out of the data. We'll just start still having compatible data warehousing,
right?
But oftentimes people look at it as an either-or type of process.
When I think about those sort of, Plato's forms of how I'd like to see it, I think of SOA coming from an operational data perspective rather than a warehousing perspective. This is, of course, there's many hybrid approaches there, but I think the use is a little different, right? I think data served from SOA is going to be more used operationally, opposed to a data warehouse, which is going to be used more for business intelligence. That's a very kind of high-level distinction, and the truth is there could be a lot of gray there, but that's kind of the way I got it. Are there any other thoughts around that?
Good.
All right. What methods do you use to find business requirements?
Good one. Honestly, the best way to do it that I found, and we've been fairly successful with this, is, and I'm approaching this more from a business rules standpoint. This is something I'm a little more familiar with more recently. Same idea, though. The idea that we have is really to get to know the business users rather than send them emails, hey, can you send me these business requirements? We really try to schedule time with them, just like Peter was talking about, and that's easier said than done, I get. more time you can spend, the better. And particularly, we take a very collaborative approach, right? We're not just asking these questions. We're showing, look, here's what we think the requirements are. Can you take a look at this? Can you know, do you see any gaps, right? How is your group using this? So we really try to do sort of an interview session almost, or maybe more like a therapy session. We really try to get to the heart of what the requirements are. And then including them sort of in those early steps as you develop the requirements, or at least as you understand them, and come to them with the idea that, look, you do this, and I don't. I'm trying to pull this out of your and your coworkers' heads. So help me, help me find these gaps. And again, use the SMEs, the subject matter experts, trying to parse this. So again, a very collaborative approach just requires face-to-face time, I think, in a lot of cases.
And time is really the key.
Yeah.
Remember that most of these projects are done is that somebody who, at the beginning of the project where you know the least about it, right, is predicting how long it's going to take, how complex the project is going to be, what the deliverables are going to be, and all the rest of the things that are going to happen years and years down the road. Right. We are saying here at Data Blueprint that a problem well defined is a problem half solved. Right. And we mean that in the literal sense. Right. If we can get the requirements really well understood, then the cost of building that system will be half of what it is in most organizations. And this is where we can be tremendously successful. Now, a number of different requirements, methods that you can use to go through the process. Right. And again, surveys, interviews, questions, there's a whole plethora of things that we can do, but none of them substitutes for doing what Stephen was describing, which we really call going and living with the users. Right. Let's see what your day-to-day life is. It's fine to say, I need to look at targets, and when I see the targets, I do range finding on them. And when I do range finding, then I make sure that I've got the right type of shell in the chamber, and then I shoot it. Right? And you go, great, I read it all down, I really understand it. It's, oh, by the way, we're doing this in the heat of battle while somebody else is shooting it up. Yeah, right, exactly. Oh, that changes things.
Right. Yeah, I think that pretty much nailed it. It's all about collaboration, and I really think it's important to try to sell the idea that the more collaboration you get now, the less headache there's going to be later. And I think that's universally true. I've never seen an exception to that.
We actually have good, solid data to back that up.
Right.
All right, great. That's all the questions we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's event. We hope you have enjoyed it. Thanks again to Dataversity and Shannon for hosting us. Once again, you will receive today's materials within the next 2 business days. Our webinar next month will be data strategy, so hopefully you'll be able to join us for that as well. As always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Megan, everybody, we've included a lot of reference material in here for you to take away with us. Shannon, thanks as always. We'll talk to you next month. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Thank you to you as well. And thanks to everyone for participating in all the interaction. We just love it. And as always, and you guys always ask about the polls. I couldn't get myself unmuted fast enough. So the timing, of course, is based off a lot of experience and trial and error, of course. So a lot of our own data collected. I hope everyone has a happy holidays. And again, Peter and Stephen, thank you so much for this great presentation. And thanks as always. Have a great day.